In the year 1590, after several attempts to sail from England, John White finally returned to the Roanoke colony, bringing the much-needed supplies he had set off for 3 years ago. Increasing tensions between the Spanish and the English had caused a series of setbacks, but when he finally did return to the Roanoke site, he found it completely abandoned. White and the sailors he had brought with him found 3 letters, C-R-O, carved into a nearby tree. They later found the word Croatoan carved into another one. This was a code. If the colonists at Roanoke ever had to leave, they were to carve in trees, houses, broomstick handles. That was a joke. The location of where they would head off to. If they had to leave in distress, they were to draw a cross over their destination. Since there were no crosses drawn over the C-R-O and the word Croatoan, John White was pretty relieved, but was a bit uneasy. You see, the plan had been to move 50 miles inland, not to head south to one of the islands. White had made plans to visit Croatoan, occupied by the tribe of Native Americans of the same name. But the anchor of one of his ships broke, and the ship itself ran aground, and a series of storms kept berating the ships. The sailors elected to abandon the search for the lost colony, and eventually John White reluctantly agreed. He would never be able to gather the funds to revisit Roanoke and look for the lost colony. He would never find the daughter and the granddaughter that he had left behind. The lost colony of Roanoke is a mystery that we still kind of talk about to this day. I mean, what the heck happened to all these people? Were they wiped out by vengeful Native Americans or disease? Did they make a place for themselves among the Croatoan tribe? Let's look into that in this week's episode of Histories, Mysteries, and Conspiracies. So in order to get at least an inkling of knowledge about what happened to the colony at Roanoke, we need to look into the history before the colony became the colony. And it starts with Sir Walter Raleigh. Now, Raleigh was the half-brother of famed explorer Humphrey Gilbert, and was most likely inspired by his elder half-brother's ventures. Sure, finding the mythical Northwest Passage would have been a cash cow for Queen Elizabeth I, but Raleigh had 2 things on his mind. The first was sticking it to England's public enemy number 1, Spain, and the second was colonizing the New World. Now, why not? Big Philip II at Spain had a glorious empire and was cashing in all that coin from expeditions to South America. So Queen Bess was looking to get some of that sweet, sweet colonizer money. So how does Raleigh play into this? Walter figured out how to play the game, which I just lost. He schmoozed his way right up into Liz First's heart. And how could Lizzie ignore him? He had a Devon accent and his pet name was Water. Oh boy. The first colonizing mission was a reconnaissance mission. Their goal was to find the right spot for an English colony. They shipped out in 1584, and a few months later, the party began to follow the Florida coast. They did this for about a week, and arrived on the Outer Banks of North Carolina in July. After searching for a little bit, they finally found a passage between the Currituck, Albemarle, and Pamlico. Eventually, they dropped anchor about a mile away from Hatteras Island. So let's get into the native peoples that lived in this area, and yes, it is important. There were 3 major tribes that lived along the coastal region: the Secotans, the Wet'miauks, and the Chowanoks. These were a semi-autonomous collective made up of Algonquin-speaking tribes. The Chowanoks lived along the banks of the Chowan River. They were led by Minnetonka. The eastern banks of the Chowan River and the northern shore of the Albemarle were occupied by the Weepamoks. The area of the Albemarle Sound to the Pamlico River were occupied by the Secotans. Their chief was Winwinga. Back to the white people. After encountering some of the locals, the recon boys were greeted by a delegation led by the brother of Winwinga, Ranganimo. Once the natives and the English were at ease with each other, the natives gave the English a guided tour of their land. After 6 weeks, the recon team packed ship and headed back to England, and they took 2 native peoples with them, Antio and Wachisi. The mission was dubbed a success, which landed Walter Raleigh a sweet, sweet knighthood, and he was made governor of some of the land in North America, which did not take into account that there were people already living there. The land was titled Virginia, so Raleigh set to work on a new colonizing mission and handpicked his team. Let's go through them. Ralph Lane, a professional soldier who fought the Irish. Sir Francis Walsingham, the Secretary of State at the time. Joachim Gans, a Jewish metallurgist, which was odd given the fact that at the time England had a ban on all Jews since 1290. Thomas Harriot, a fresh Oxford grad who was pretty good at basically everything. John White, an artist who painted scenes and peoples from the expedition, and Sir Richard Grenville, a merchant and feudal lord of Bideford. He was also a noted jerkwad. So the team and a few of the men went to a little village, and White started drawing and painting. Most notable about White's paintings of the native peoples was that he didn't depict them as devilish, savage monsters. He also didn't depict them as like the Renaissance ideal person. He painted the natives as people, which is kind of cool. So everything was going pretty smoothly until one of Ralph Lane's men noticed that their drinking cup had gone missing. So Grenville sent a man named Philip Amadas to go investigate and talk to the natives about where the missing drinking cup might be. This was a mistake because Amadas had a mean streak a mile wide and the temper of a toddler. So Amadas gave the natives a deadline on when to find the cup. When the natives did not reach that deadline, Amadas and his men, quote, burnt and spoiled their corn and town. And just like that, relations with the native peoples began to go south. Over a cup. Despite all this, Ranganimo and Winwinga allowed the colonists a temporary spot on Roanoke. But the European mindset, any land that's vacant is ripe for the taking, prevailed. Lane seems to have enacted strict rules and regulations on his men that would have stopped his men from oppressing the native peoples in any kind of way. Which, if that's true, good on Lane. He even warned his men that getting revenge on the native peoples for any kind of perceived infraction would eventually lead to the death of the Englishmen, whether by fighting or by starvation. It's just a shame that he wasn't able to heed his own advice. So, while Harriet was buddying up and unknowingly spreading disease among the natives, Lane and his men were cooped up on Roanoke, starving. He tried to calm down his restless men, who were waiting on Grenville to come back to them with a supply ship, but it was a fruitless effort. They began to hunt for provisions, getting further and further away from the lands under Winwinga's control. So the Socotan chief sent his own guides with the English, who warned that the Chowhatan chief, Minatonan, was going to ambush them. So instead of sending a delegation to talk things out with the Chowhatans, Lane stormed Minatonan's main village and ended up capturing the chief. Minatonan then told Lane that there was no planned ambush, and that if Lane really wanted to find some sweet, sweet land, he needed to go up the Mortuck River, where they were ambushed. So while Lane was off making things worse, a coalition of Carolina Algonquins began advocating for the removal of the English, and they were led by Winwinga's new senior advisor and familiar face, Wanchesi. Turns out he didn't like being taken from his home and paraded around a bunch of white people. So while the English were away, Roanoke was evacuated, and the fishing traps that the native peoples had built for the English were destroyed. And this is the part where Lane realized that they hadn't brought anyone who was capable of doing stuff like building fishing traps. So Lane reverted to what he did best: warfare. He led his men on an attack of the Socotans, which resulted in the death of Winwinga. Eventually, the fighting and the winter took its toll on the colonists at Roanoke, and the men elected to abandon the colony and the fort that was built entirely. But hope came in the form of professional pirate Sir Francis Drake, who had just got done sacking a bunch of villages and ships along the Florida coast. Don't worry, they belonged to the Spanish. And here's the kicker. A few days later, Grenville did arrive with the supply ships. But seeing the empty colony and the abandoned fort, Grenville left about 18 men behind with the promise of a return. So the colonizing effort was seen as a failure. But Raleigh was persistent. He was able to obtain another shot at colonizing America in the name of the English. And he was able to choose his own governor this time. His selection was John White. In the spring of 1587, 115 colonists set sail to the land that was dubbed Virginia. Among them was John White's daughter, a then pregnant Eleanor Dare. A few months after sailing, the colonists found themselves at the Pamlico Sound and forced to make do on Roanoke. Thanks to A, the pilot Samuel Fernandez kicking them off, and B, John White saying, okay. So the colonists were dumped on Roanoke, surrounded by Native Americans who did not like them. Another surprise came in the form of the fort where Grenville had left his 18 men. It had been completely abandoned, and some of it was ransacked. White then proposed to the local Croatoan tribe that peace should be made between the English and the native peoples, and the Croatoan agreed to be the go-between. They said that they would talk to the other tribes and give an answer to White in about a week. However, when a week passed and White still hadn't heard anything, he grew a bit impatient. So he gathered some men and they went and attacked the place where they assumed the coalition who was against them would be. But they ended up attacking the Croatoans who were rummaging through the abandoned site where the coalition who was against the English people were. So they ended up attacking their own allies. The lesson here, guys, is patience. Just be patient. Just wait. You can wait. But a few days later, Eleanor Dare gave birth to the first English baby born in North America, a daughter named Virginia. Virginia Dare was John White's granddaughter. Unease began to spread through the colonists. They felt that they needed more supplies and more people in order to survive at Roanoke. John was elected to go back to England to gather supplies and people, though he reluctantly went. By the time that John White got back to England, the Spanish Armada was near completion, and England was gearing up for a Spanish invasion. Ships for regular sailing were becoming more scarce, being regulated to the war effort, and White had trouble getting funds together to hire a ship to sail him back to Roanoke. Finally, in 1590, White was able to sail back to the colony, which he found abandoned and empty. So, what happened to the colony at Roanoke? We don't really know for certain, but a few theories have come to the forefront. One in particular is that the colony did not go to Croatoan. They actually did the original plan, which was to go 50 miles westward, more inland. And this theory kind of centers around a watercolor map that John White had painted, and this inspired the search for Site X. In 2012, researchers using X-ray spectroscopy and other imaging techniques spotted a tiny four-pointed star, colored red and blue. This was concealed under a patch of paper that White used to make corrections on his map. It was thought to mark a location of a site some 50 miles inland, which White alluded as the spot that the colonists were expected to go if they ever had to move. So some archaeologists were able to find Site X and do some digging, and they found some food storage jar, pieces of early gun flintlocks, a metal hook that was used to stretch animal skin hides. So based on the team's findings, they were able to conclude that the Roanoke colony went 50 miles, inland, and assimilated among the native tribes that didn't want to kill them. But it's not anything conclusive. Another theory is that they had failed to sail back to England. The theory states that once the colonists realized the dire straits they were in, they tried to drum up a ship together, take a chance across the Atlantic. but storms and such could have destroyed the ship, and they would have been lost at sea. Another theory is that Spanish troops wiped them out. It is possible, given the tensions between England and Spain at the time, that Spanish ships could have made their way into the Roanoke area, found the English settlers, deemed them trespassers, and had them killed. Another theory is that they succumbed to their own diseases. Another theory is that they resorted to cannibalism, which is not great, but it happened at Jamestown. Another is that they joined the Croatoan tribe. According to the History Channel, researchers found evidence that the colonists had settled themselves with the tribe and may have even broken off to join other tribes in the mainland. And another theory is that the native tribes who had formed a coalition against them had killed them. Now let's get into some of the crazy ones. So a great cuckoo bananas theory is that they transformed into trees. This theory kind of stems from the fact that some people believe the word Croatoan is a word of dark magic. And so by carving Croatoan into a tree, that led to the colonists magically changing into trees. Ooh. Another theory is that they were possessed by the devil. Allegedly, the Croatoan tribe believed that evil spirits hung around the island, but I feel like this has a lot to do with the fact that writers and researchers have strummed up these crazy, dark, mystical, magical stories about Roanoke that don't really have a basis in reality. Let's just say that. Another theory is that they were abducted by aliens. No, I kind of hate this theory, but it is kind of funny. So according to the Zombie Research Society, there is proof that the colonists at Roanoke were destroyed by a zombie plague. No. So, has there been any conclusive evidence on what happened to the colony at Roanoke? No. Will there ever be any conclusive evidence to what happened to the colony at Roanoke? Probably not. It's most likely that they may have been integrated into one of the neighboring tribes, and it's also possible that they were wiped out by disease in some of the tribes that really didn't like the fact that there were English people in their lands. Whatever the case, the mystery persists. That's all the time we have for today. We'll see you next week. Bye.